The letter fluttered to the floor, the words searing into my mind like a branding iron. Lydia, you have a sister. My mother-in-law's voice echoed hollowly as I stared at her in disbelief. Robert shifted uncomfortably beside me on the plush sofa. Greta, what are you talking about? She clasped her hands, her eyes downcast. I should have told you both sooner. Years ago, before we met, Robert. She trailed off, leaving the implication hanging heavily in the air. A sick feeling twisted in my gut as the truth dawned on me. Robert had a child from another relationship, a daughter he had never mentioned, a secret buried so deep that even I was oblivious. Who is she? I demanded, my voice trembling with a potent mix of shock and betrayal. Robert's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Her name is Emma. She's 16 now. 16 years old. The realization slammed into me like a freight train. This girl had existed all this time, mere miles away from us, and we knew nothing about her. Greta reached out, her papery skin brushing my arm. I'm sorry, dear. We wanted to protect you from... I jerked away from her touch, anger flaring hot. Protect me? By lying all these years? Robert ran a hand through his tousled brown hair, agitation etched into his features. Lydia, please. Let me explain. But I had heard enough. Snatching my purse from the side table, I stormed out of the living room and into the hallway, the plush carpet muffling my hurried footsteps. Lydia, wait! Robert called after me, but I kept moving, yanking open the front door and bursting out onto the sun-drenched porch. The peaceful tree-lined street mocked me with its tranquility as I paced back and forth, drawing in deep, shuddering breaths. How could he have done this? After everything we'd been through together, building our life, our family. The crunch of gravel underfoot made me spin around. Robert stood at the edge of the driveway, hands shoved into his pockets, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Talk to me, he pleaded, his hazel eyes boring into mine. Don't shut me out, not now. I opened my mouth, a torrent of recriminations ready to spill forth, but then I caught a glimpse of the diamond solitaire on my left hand, sparkling in the sunlight. A reminder of the vows we had made, the life we had promised to share. Drawing a steadying breath, I met his gaze levelly. Then you'd better start explaining. All of it, Robert. No more lies, no more secrets. I deserve to know the truth. His shoulders sagged, and he nodded slowly. You're right. You do. I'll tell you everything, Lydia. I swear it. As I stood there, rooted on that very porch where we had welcomed our firstborn son into the world, I could feel the landscape of our lives shifting irrevocably. The solid ground was crumbling beneath my feet, and I had no choice but to wade into the unknown, seeking answers and bracing for the impact of long-buried secrets. The moving truck rumbled up the driveway, its bulky form casting a long shadow across the freshly paved asphalt. I watched from the living room window as the burly movers unloaded box after box, their grunts carrying through the glass pane. Are you sure about this, Greta? I asked, turning to face my mother-in-law. She stood in the middle of the room, surveying the space with a critical eye. Of course, dear. She patted my arm in a placating gesture. With Emma coming to live with us, you'll need all the help you can get. My jaw clenched at her condescending tone, as if I couldn't handle my own family affairs without her interference. The front door swung open, and Robert stepped inside, his brow furrowed. The movers are just about finished unloading Greta's things. Excellent, Greta declared, clasping her hands together. Now, where should we set up my bedroom? I opened my mouth to protest, but Robert cut me off with a pleading look. Mom, are you sure you don't want to reconsider staying in your own place? We've got plenty of room here, but... Nonsense, Greta scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. I'm not getting any younger, and with my health issues, it's best if I'm close by. You'll need me around, especially with a teenage girl in the house. A flicker of irritation crossed Robert's face, but he remained silent. I knew he was torn, caught between his loyalty to me and his sense of duty toward his mother. The sound of footsteps on the porch steps made us all turn. A tall, slender girl with long, dark hair stepped into the entryway, her gaze flitting nervously around the room. Emma, Robert said, his expression softening. Come on in, sweetheart. Greta rushed forward, enveloping the girl in a tight embrace. My dear granddaughter, welcome to your new home. Emma stiffened, her eyes finding mine over Greta's shoulder. I offered her a tentative smile, trying to convey a sense of warmth and reassurance. As Greta released her, Emma smoothed her hands over her jeans, her shoulders hunched inward. "Hi," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "It's so wonderful to have you here," Greta gushed, taking Emma's hands in her own. "We're going to be one big, happy family." A knot formed in my stomach at her words. Happy family? With the way things were unfolding, that seemed like a distant dream. Robert cleared his throat, stepping forward to place a gentle hand on Emma's back. "Why don't I show you to your room? Get you settled in?" Emma nodded, relief flickering across her features as she followed him out of the living room and down the hallway. Greta watched them go, a self-satisfied smile playing on her lips. Then, as if sensing my gaze, she turned to face me, her expression hardening. "Don't worry, Lydia," she said, her voice taking on a steely edge. "I'll make sure everything runs smoothly around here. You can count on me." A shiver ran down my spine at the glint in her eyes. In that moment, I knew Greta's presence in our home was about more than just helping out. She had an agenda, one that threatened to upend the delicate balance I had so carefully cultivated. As I stood there, surrounded by the trappings of the life Robert and I had built together, a sense of dread washed over me. The battle lines were being drawn, and I would have to fight to protect everything I held dear. The days bled into weeks, and a tense undercurrent rippled through our household. Emma remained withdrawn, speaking only when spoken to, and retreating to her room at every opportunity. Greta, on the other hand, seemed to relish her new role as matriarch, inserting herself into every aspect of our lives. "Lydia, dear, have you thought about signing Emma up for extracurriculars?" she asked one morning over breakfast, her tone saccharine sweet. "A girl her age needs structure and activities to keep her grounded." I exchanged a glance with Robert, who shrugged almost imperceptibly. "I was going to discuss some options with her," I replied, keeping my voice level, "but I wanted to give her some time to adjust first." Greta tsked disapprovingly. "Well, don't wait too long. You know how teenagers can be, idle hands and all that." Emma hunched lower in her chair, her gaze fixed on her plate. My heart ached for her. This girl thrust into our lives with no say in the matter. Later that day, as I was folding laundry in the living room, Greta swept in, her footsteps purposeful. "I've been thinking," she announced without preamble. "Emma could use a feminine influence in her life, a strong role model to guide her." I paused, a shirt dangling from my hands as I eyed her warily. "I'm her mother now, Greta. I think I can handle that role just fine." She waved a dismissive hand. Of course. But you have to admit you're a bit unconventional, a modern woman focused on your career." Her gaze drifted pointedly to the nursing textbooks stacked on the end table. Anger flared hot in my chest, but I bit back a retort, reminding myself to choose my battles carefully. Greta seemed to sense my irritation, for she softened her tone. "I only want what's best for Emma," she said, resting a hand on my arm. "You understand that, don't you, dear?" Before I could respond, the sound of footsteps drew our attention. Emma hovered in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Everything okay?" I asked, offering her a reassuring smile. She opened her mouth, then seemed to think better of it, shaking her head. "Never mind," she muttered, turning on her heel and retreating back down the hallway. Greta watched her go, a calculating look in her eyes. "Like I said, Lydia, she needs guidance, and I intend to provide it, whether you like it or not." A shiver ran down my spine at the thinly veiled threat in her words. In that moment I knew Greta wasn't just overstepping boundaries. She was deliberately driving a wedge between Emma and me, undermining my authority at every turn. As I stood there, clutching the crumpled shirt in my hands, a hard knot of determination formed in my gut. I wouldn't let Greta win, not without a fight. This was my family, my home, and I would do whatever it took to protect it. The sound of shattering glass jolted me awake. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart pounding as I strained to make out the muffled voices drifting from downstairs. Robert stirred beside me, his brow furrowed. "What was that?" he mumbled groggily. I threw off the covers, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Stay here," I whispered, sliding out of bed and grabbing my robe from the foot of the mattress. Creeping down the hallway, I could make out Greta's shrill tones, punctuated by Emma's sullen replies. As I reached the living room, the scene that unfolded made my blood run cold. Shards of broken ceramic littered the floor, the remnants of a once pristine vase. Emma stood in the center of the chaos, her shoulders hunched defensively as Greta loomed over her, fury etched into every line of her face. "You clumsy, foolish girl," Greta raged, jabbing a finger toward the shattered pieces. "Do you have any idea how much that cost? How precious it was to me?" Emma flinched, her gaze downcast. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Sorry?" Greta cut her off with a harsh laugh. "Sorry doesn't fix anything, does it?" Anger flared hot in my chest, and I surged forward, planting myself between them. "That's enough, Greta," I snapped, my voice laced with steel. "Leave her alone." Greta's eyes widened in outrage, her mouth working soundlessly for a moment before she found her voice. "How dare you take her side? This is exactly why she needs discipline, Lydia. You're far too soft on her." "She's a child," I shot back, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "And she made a mistake, one that doesn't warrant this kind of reaction." Greta opened her mouth, no doubt to unleash another tirade, but I held up a hand, cutting her off. "No, I'm done listening to you berate her, undermine me at every turn. This is my home, Greta, my family, and I won't have you treating Emma this way anymore." For a long, tense moment, we locked eyes, a silent battle of wills playing out between us. Then, with a derisive snort, Greta spun on her heel and stormed out of the room, her slippered feet slapping against the hardwood floors. Silence descended, thick and oppressive. I turned to face Emma, my anger melting into concern as I took in her pale, stricken expression. "Are you okay?" I asked gently, reaching out to touch her arm. She flinched away from my touch, her eyes glittering with unshed tears. "Why did you do that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You didn't have to defend me." My heart clenched at the raw vulnerability in her words. This poor girl, so accustomed to being cast aside, neglected, of course she wouldn't understand someone standing up for her. "Yes, I did," I said firmly, holding her gaze. "Emma, you're part of this family now, whether you believe it or not, and I'll always have your back, no matter what." A flicker of emotion crossed her features, there and gone in an instant. Then, with a jerky nod, she turned and fled the room, leaving me standing amid the shattered remains of Greta's precious vase. As I stared at the broken pieces, a grim sense of determination settled over me. This was just the beginning. Greta's true colors were starting to show, and I knew her actions would only escalate from here. But I was ready, prepared to fight for what was mine with every ounce of strength I possessed. The battle lines had been drawn, and there would be no turning back. The envelope sat innocuously on the kitchen counter, its contents promising to upend everything I thought I knew. With trembling fingers, I tore it open, my breath catching in my throat as I scanned the documents inside. Pages upon pages of financial records detailing Greta's assets and investments, all meticulously organized in her familiar looping script. At first glance, it seemed like a straightforward portfolio, the kind of paperwork one would expect from a widow managing her late husband's estate. But then I saw it, a series of notations and calculations, outlining what appeared to be a plan to liquidate her holdings and funnel the proceeds into a new trust, a trust with both her name and Robert's listed as beneficiaries. My hands went numb, the papers fluttering to the countertop as the full weight of Greta's machinations slammed into me. This wasn't just about asserting control over the household. She was positioning herself to take control of our finances, our future. The sound of footsteps made me whirl around. Emma hovered in the doorway, her brow furrowed as she took in my stricken expression. "What's wrong?" she asked hesitantly. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I explain the depths of Greta's betrayal, the insidious way she had wormed her way into our lives under the guise of family? Scooping up the papers, I brushed past Emma and headed for the living room, my steps fueled by a simmering fury. Greta looked up from her knitting as I entered, her eyes narrowing at my thunderous expression. "Lydia, dear, whatever is the matter?" I flung the documents onto the coffee table, watching as they scattered across the polished surface. "This is the matter, Greta," I bit out, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "Your little scheme to bleed us dry and take everything we've worked for." Comprehension dawned on her features, swiftly replaced by a mask of indignation. "How dare you accuse me of such things?" she blustered, rising to her feet. "I'm simply trying to secure my future, ensure I'm taken care of in my old age." "By stealing from your own son?" I shook my head in disgust. You're unbelievable, Greta. Utterly shameless. Her eyes flashed dangerously. Watch your tone with me, girl. You have no idea what I've sacrificed for this family. Sacrificed? The word tasted bitter on my tongue. All you've done is take, and manipulate and undermine everyone around you for your own selfish gain. Greta opened her mouth, no doubt to unleash another torrent of vitriol, but I held up a hand, cutting her off. Save it. I'm done listening to your lies. I turned on my heel, my heart pounding in my ears. This ends now, Greta. One way or another, it all ends. As I stalked away, leaving her sputtering in outrage behind me, a grim sense of determination settled over me. Greta had shown her true colors, and there was no going back. No more playing by her rules, no more letting her run roughshod over my life. It was time to fight back, to protect what was mine at all costs. The gloves were finally off, and I intended to emerge victorious, no matter how high the stakes. I paced the length of the living room, my footsteps muffled by the plush carpet as I waited for Robert to return home. The damning evidence of Greta's schemes lay strewn across the coffee table, a stark reminder of the battle lines that had been drawn. The sound of the front door opening made me whirl around. Robert stepped inside, his brow furrowing as he took in my tense posture. Lydia? What's going on? Without a word, I gestured toward the papers scattered across the table. He crossed the room, his frown deepening as he scanned the documents. These are Mom's financial records, he murmured, glancing up at me with a puzzled expression. Why are you looking at? His voice trailed off as realization dawned, his face paling. Oh God, she's trying to take everything, isn't she? I nodded grimly. It's all right there, Robert. Her plan to liquidate her assets and set up a new trust with both of your names on it. He sank onto the couch, cradling his head in his hands. I can't believe she would do this. My own mother. Sympathy tugged at my heart, but I tamped it down, hardening my resolve. Believe it, I said, my voice steely. Greta has shown her true colors, and we can't afford to be blind to them any longer. Robert looked up, his eyes haunted. What are we going to do? I drew in a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation ahead. We're going to stop her once and for all. But I need you with me on this, Robert. No more wavering, no more divided loyalties. It's us against her now. He held my gaze for a long moment, conflict flickering across his features. Then, with a slow nod, he straightened his shoulders. You're right. I'm with you, Lydia. All the way. A sense of grim satisfaction washed over me. United, we stood a chance against Greta's machinations. Divided, she would surely tear us apart. Over the next few days, we strategized, poring over the financial documents and mapping out our counterattack. I knew we had to move swiftly before Greta could make her next move. Finally, the plan was in place. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders as I strode into the living room, where Greta sat knitting by the window. Greta, I said, my voice ringing with authority, we need to talk. She looked up, her eyes narrowing at my tone. About what, dear? About your little scheme to take over this household and everything we've worked for. I gestured toward the documents arrayed on the coffee table. The game is up, Greta. We know exactly what you've been plotting. For a moment she remained impassive, her expression carefully blank. Then, slowly, a sly smile curved her lips. Well, she purred, setting aside her knitting needles. I see you've been a busy little bee, haven't you? Robert stepped forward, his jaw set in a hard line. It's over, Mom. We're not going to let you manipulate us anymore. Greta's eyes flashed with contempt as she rose to her feet, drawing herself up to her full height. You ungrateful boy, she spat. After everything I've done for this family, you turn on me like this? I held up a hand, cutting off her tirade. Enough, Greta. We're done playing by your rules. From now on, things are going to be different around here, or you can pack your bags and leave. Her gaze shifted to me, her lip curling in a sneer. Is that a threat, Lydia? It's a promise, I shot back, holding her stare without flinching. The choice is yours, but make no mistake, I will protect what's mine, no matter what it takes. For a long, tense moment, we remained locked in a silent battle of wills. Then, with a derisive snort, Greta turned on her heel and swept from the room, her slippered feet slapping against the hardwood floors. As her footsteps faded, I exhaled a long, shuddering breath, the adrenaline ebbing from my veins. Robert stepped forward, wrapping his arms around me in a fierce embrace. Thank you, he murmured into my hair, for standing up for us, for our family. I leaned into his warmth, drawing strength from his solid presence. The war was far from over, but for now we had claimed a small victory, and I intended to savor it, because the real battle was still to come. The dining room table groaned under the weight of the lavish spread I had prepared, a feast fit for a celebration, though the atmosphere was anything but festive. Tension hung thick in the air as our extended family trickled in, casting furtive glances my way. Robert's Aunt Marjorie was the first to speak up, her brow furrowed in concern. "Lydia, dear, what's this all about? Your message sounded rather urgent." I exchanged a loaded glance with Robert, who gave me an imperceptible nod. Taking a steadying breath, I turned to face our assembled relatives. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice ringing with steely determination. "I know this was somewhat last minute, but there's an important matter we need to address as a family." Greta shifted in her seat, her eyes narrowing. "And what matter would that be exactly?" I met her challenging stare head-on, refusing to be cowed. "Your relentless attempts to undermine my authority in this household, and your underhanded schemes to take control of our finances for your own gain." A collective gasp rippled through the room as I laid out the evidence, the damning paperwork detailing Greta's meticulous plans. Shock and disbelief flickered across the faces of our relatives as the truth came to light. Greta, for her part, remained outwardly impassive, but I could see the fury simmering in her eyes, the muscle twitching in her jaw. "How dare you accuse me of such things?" she spat, rising to her feet and planting her hands on the table with a resounding thud. "I've only ever had this family's best interests at heart. By trying to bleed us dry?" I shot back, refusing to back down. "By manipulating and deceiving us at every turn? That's not love, Greta. That's greed, plain and simple." Her face contorted with rage, and for a moment I thought she might lunge across the table at me. But then a tremor ran through her frame and she seemed to deflate, sinking back into her chair. "You ungrateful, selfish girl," she hissed, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "After everything I've sacrificed." A heavy silence descended, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Our relatives shifted uncomfortably, their gazes darting between Greta and me, unsure of where to place their loyalties. Finally, Aunt Marjorie cleared her throat, her expression one of profound sadness. "Greta, is it true? Did you really do these things?" Greta's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Then, with a jerky nod, she seemed to crumple in on herself, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She whispered, her voice barely audible, "It's all true." A collective exhalation swept through the room, as if everyone had been holding their breath. I felt a surge of vindication, tempered by an unexpected twinge of pity for the broken woman before me. Robert reached out, his hand finding mine and giving it a gentle squeeze. A silent show of support and solidarity, reminding me that we were in this together, united against the threat that had nearly torn our family apart. As the shock wore off and our relatives began to process the revelations, one by one, they turned to face Greta, their expressions ranging from disappointment to outright disgust. And in that moment, I knew the battle had been won. Greta's web of lies and manipulation had finally unraveled, leaving her exposed and powerless in the face of the family she had sought to control. It was a hollow victory, tinged with the bitter aftertaste of betrayal. But as I looked around the table at the faces of those I loved most, I knew it was a sacrifice worth making to protect what truly mattered. No matter the cost, I would always fight for my family. The gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of freshly turned earth as I knelt in the garden, my fingers sinking into the rich soil. Beside me, Emma crouched, carefully arranging a cluster of vibrant petunias in the raised bed we had constructed. "Like this, Mom?" she asked, glancing up at me with those wide, earnest eyes that still made my heart clench with a bittersweet pang. A year ago, I never could have imagined hearing those words from her lips, the simple endearment a reminder of how far we'd come, of the battles we'd fought, and the wounds we'd healed. "Perfect," I murmured, reaching out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Her smile bloomed, radiant and unguarded, and in that moment, the weight of our shared past seemed to lift, if only for an instant. The crunch of footsteps on the patio drew my gaze upward. Robert approached, a tray laden with glasses of lemonade balanced in his hands. His expression softened as he took in the scene before him, and I felt a surge of love and gratitude for this man who had stood by my side through it all. "Thought you two could use a refreshment break," he said, setting the tray down and sinking onto the edge of the garden bed. Emma immediately reached for a glass, gulping down the tart liquid with unabashed enthusiasm. I chuckled, shaking my head in fond exasperation before claiming a glass of my own. As I sipped the cool beverage, my gaze drifted across the meticulously tended flower beds and neatly trimmed hedges that bordered our property. This sanctuary, our home. It had nearly been torn from our grasp by the very person who should have cherished it most. Greta's absence hung like a specter, her manipulations and betrayals casting a long shadow over the hard-won peace we had finally achieved. But in the end, her greed and selfishness had been her undoing, driving her from our lives in a blaze of bitter recriminations. "You okay?" Robert's voice, soft and concerned, drew me from my reverie. I mustered a smile, reaching out to give his hand a reassuring squeeze. "I'm fine, just thinking about how far we've come." His expression sobered and he nodded slowly. "It hasn't been easy, has it? But we made it through together." Emma set down her empty glass, her brow furrowing as she studied our somber expressions. "Are you talking about Greta again?" The question, posed with the guileless candor of youth, struck a chord deep within me. So much had been sacrificed, so many battles waged, all to protect this remarkable young woman from the toxic influence of my former mother-in-law. "Yes," I said simply, holding her gaze. "But that's all in the past now. Greta made her choices, and we made ours, to stand together as a family, no matter what." Emma's features softened, and she inched closer, resting her head on my shoulder in a rare display of affection. "I'm glad you did. I don't know where I'd be without you guys." A lump formed in my throat as I wrapped an arm around her slender frame, drawing her close. Robert reached out, his calloused palm cradling my cheek as he leaned in to press a tender kiss to my forehead. In that moment, surrounded by the vibrant blooms and the ones I loved most, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them united. A family bound not by blood, but by an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of adversity. We had won our battle against Greta's toxic influence, emerging battered but unbroken. And as I looked into the hopeful faces of my husband and daughter, I silently vowed that nothing would ever threaten the sanctuary we had created, the home we had fought so fiercely to preserve. This was our new beginning, our chance to heal and grow, and I intended to nurture it with the same fierce devotion I had shown in defending it from those who sought to destroy us.